So we're going to tackle the adding and removing now of the apples. And we're going to do this in two parts because it's going to be a bit much to start doing this in one go. First off, let's change this over to make it a bit more generic and check if it's an apple that we're interested in. So let's change this to underscore apple. And remember, Ozars is now going to generate a tuple with two items in there, namely apple and player. And we're going to check if it's in the database. So we do our and check apple. So this line, again, it's not going to generate new tuples since this is this apple. It's not a new variable. So we still have one result with one tuple in there. So this is going to evaluate to true if the item that was added to a character is an apple from our database. So let's do the same here for the removing. But of course now we can't just set this flag on a player. We're gonna change over to a global flag for now. We'll change it back to a character flag in a bit. It's just gonna say like, do we have all the apples or not? And to track if we picked up all the apples, we're gonna say that as soon as you pick up an apple, we're gonna remove it from the Jack Apples and World database since it's no longer in the world. So how do you remove something from a database? And it's simple, you just type not, then space and the database name, and you fill in the entry that you want to remove. So what this statement is going to cause ours to do, don't forget the semicolon here, you're in the then part again, is it's going to look up everything that matches apple in this database. For us it's going to be one row, and it's going to remove it. So when this event is added and it's an apple, the apple will no longer be in this database. Now the reverse, when you remove something, when it's an apple, we're going to add it to the database Jack Apples and World. And how do you add something to a database? You do that like this, without the not. This will just cause it to be added to the database. Now, you could do this like this as well. You can use specific items. You don't have to use variables. And if you add this to the database, if I do this 3-4 times, this is not gonna add the apple a bunch of times to this database. It overwrites it. So in the end, if I do this, let's assume this is an empty database. If I do this, there's going to be one item in there, and it's going to be a Jack Apple. So what we have now, let's leave this for now, is that if we picked up every apple from this database, this one is going to be empty. And we want to set an event, and we'll use a global event for now, to indicate that you picked up all the apples. So if you picked up all the apples, that means that the Jack Apples and World database is going to be empty. So we're going to check if the database is empty, and if it's empty, set a variable. So how do we check if a database is empty? Now, first off, we have a problem to begin with already, since we're in the then part here. And in the then part, you can't check databases anymore. Those can only be checked in the if part of a rule. So we'll have to check the database somewhere else. And the way we do this is with what we call a procedure. And a procedure is something you'll use if you want to check databases if you're in a then part, or if you just want to group certain script statements together that you're going to use a lot. So say for example, if you're teleporting characters a lot and you're going to do the same thing, set them off stage and play an effect on them. If you would do that a bunch of times, you'd always have to play the effect, set them off stage. If you make a procedure out of that, you just write your procedure once, and then you can just call your procedures in all the other spots. And that way, if you ever want to change the way that teleporting works or whatever, You can do it in one spot instead of in 20, 30 spots, and you don't have to type the same stuff over and over again. So how do you define a procedure like that? And for people who have programming experience, procedure is pretty much a function. It does not have return values though, so you can't return a value or result after you do those. So in procedures, what you typically are going to do is you're going to add or remove things from databases, or you're going to set or clear events. So let's first define our procedure here. You do this with the proc keyword, and you give it a name. And usually we're going to have these start with proc to indicate that this is a procedure, not a database or something. Well, you'll see that in a bit. Proc, let's call this check apples and world. And then you're going to open the parentheses and close them again. And then there's a then part, like in the rules, if then. So first off, this here, if you check your events that you had, they have a parameter list here. You can do the same with procedures, and I'll show that in a bit. And this is where your parameters, your extra information would come in. So we'll just have nothing here. And in this bit here in between the name and your then is exactly the same as the part in if. So you can do lookups here for databases and add restrictions on things. Pretty much do operations that are going to generate tuples. So we want to check if the database, check apples and worlds, is going to be empty. So pretty much what we want, so we're going to do our AND here to do our lookup. We want to say this. And this looks weird, but this is a special syntax. This means, like, if there's anything, I don't care what, in this database, this is going to return true. It's actually going to generate tuples as well for that, for unnamed variable. It doesn't have a name. But if this database is empty, this lookup with this unnamed variable is going to return false, and this will evaluate to true, and the then part will be executed. So that's how we're going to check how a database is empty. So if that's the case, we're going to set a global event this time. And I'm going to call it Zara's demo has apples. So of course we have to actually call our procedure, and we'll do this here. We'll get rid of this line. And we'll do this here. Check apples and world. And you do it just like that. So you just type the name and you pass the list of parameters along with it. And since this one doesn't have any, you just have the empty parentheses here. So this is also a good example why we put a proc in front of here, because this looks very similar to a database definition. And sometimes it's easy if you make a typo here. You'll notice that it's actually gonna compile. So actually, while we're at it, let's compile since it's been a while. And I want to see if I made any mistakes. This is gonna take a while. So we've already covered a lot of Osiris with databases and procedures. Procedures I'll detail a bit more in a bit, but I think you've pretty much seen everything that Osiris has to offer. There's a couple more advanced things which I might talk about, and apparently I didn't make any mistakes, so that's good news. In this here, for the remove, I'll just change that to clear our global event. So it's going to be global clear event. This is going to set the global event back to false. And get rid of this. So basically what's going to happen now is if we pick up an apple, and it's in the Jack Apples database. Again, don't get too caught up with this name. This is an item. It's any item, and just call it apple, so it's more clear that we're talking about an apple. Don't get confused. Don't think that this would only be executed for apples only. If I pick up a global bottle or whatever, I'll get this message as well, which is why we're checking on this database to make sure that it's actually an apple that we're interested in. So when we get this message and it's in this database, we're going to remove it from this database, and then we're going to check if that database is empty. And if it is, then we're going to set this event here. Now, if we remove an apple, we're going to, and it's an apple that we're interested in, we're going to add it back to this database, and we're going to clear that event. So next time we pick it up, it's going to be removed again, and the database will be empty again, and our event will be set again. So now let's try this in game. Let's build first. And we got no errors, so let's try this in game now. Hit escape here. There we go. Let's talk to him. Let's get his quest. If we talk to him. Actually, I wanted to test this in game already, but we forgot to change his dialogue. So this one is going to change again. And this is going to be condition is flag, since it's a global flag now. And I forgot the name that we used, so I'm just gonna look it up in our story editor here. Zara's demo has apples. So don't forget no semicolons here. So if we don't have, if we did give the apple quest and we don't have all the apples, we'll get this line. Let me copy this thing here. And if this event is set, we have them and we delivered our apples. Okay, so that's it. So you can tell there's already less conditions here, they're simpler, so that's good. So now actually, let's test this in game. Did you find them yet? Okay, and this still works. The dialogues get reloaded automatically every time you start in the editor. There's the wolf again, poor little wolf. So let's pick up our apples. We talk to him. Oh good, you found them, thanks so much. And if I check my inventory, you see that the apples are gone. So this all seems to be working. Now let's go back to the story editor. So now let's change our global event back to a character event. Now there's several ways to do this, and I'll show you a couple just because it's going to demonstrate some of the power of databases and procedures. So First off, notice that the character events are tied to a player, so we'll need a way to pass our player to our procedure. First off, let's change the name of this thing. Proc check. If player has all apples, and we'll make this new procedure. But we want to pass our player to our procedures so we can set our event on them. And procedures can take extra information or parameters, and you just specify it between brackets, the parentheses, I mean. And note, again, like I said, we add a proc here to make sure it's a procedure, not a database, because this looks exactly like a database definition. And I'll show you in a bit that this could be dangerous as well. So, to indicate that we have parameters or extra information fields, it's going to be exactly the same as it's done here. So what you do is you specify the type between parentheses of your extra field, which is going to be a character. The types we have are character, item, trigger, string, integer, and real. You can actually look those up. I'll show you in a bit where you can look this up. So I'm going to call this field player. Notice it's exactly the same as our events here that we got. It's the exact same syntax. So now we have our procedure and we have our player passed as an extra field here. So now we can actually set our character event on that. Now, how are we going to check if every apple is picked up by a certain player? We'll do this in one way first, and I'll show you another way after that, because usually when you're scripting there's going to be more than one way to do something. So what we're going to do here is we're going to use something that we haven't seen before yet, which is called a query. And that's a call to the game actually to ask it something like, do I have a certain item? Am I in a certain trigger? There's a bunch of other queries that you can ask the game, and the game is gonna just return you what you asked for. And the way we do that is also we put it in our hands. These things are gonna evaluate to true as well, or sometimes false if you made a mistake somewhere in your query. And the query we're gonna use is this one. Item is in character inventory. You see this has a separate color as well from the calls and the events. And you see it takes as input, this is the in here, an item, and as input a character, and as output it returns a bool, which is an integer, which is going to be 0 for false, 1 for true. So the item we want is going to be one of our apples. The character that we're interested in is the player that just picked up the apple. And we're only interested if the item is in there, so we can filter on that straight away. We can do the usual again, as calling this return and return as 1. If you want, you can do it like this. Usually you'll see in the scripting that's been done for the main game, it's been done like this, because it's just less typing and it's always good. So we need to query our database, just like we've done before in here. I'm just going to copy that. So we're going to call our procedure with the player. So we have one variable here, one tuple, it's going to be the player in there. We're going to do the lookup on our database, so Zars again is going to generate tuples, player apple, player jack apple, player jack apple 2. So nothing new here. And then we're going to use this in our query, so we're going to ask the game, is this item, and it says here query as well, is this item in the player inventory, and then it's going to return 1. queries can only be used in these parts where you specify your conditions and your restrictions, so above the then, basically in ifs and in procedures. So now we've looked up if an apple is in an inventory or not, but we need to keep track somehow that he has all the apples. So to do that, I'm going to introduce another database, a temporary one. It's going to keep track of the items that are in there, and then we're going to remove it from that database if it's not. So if we wanted to, we could reuse Jack Apples and World database actually. And why not do that actually? So let's remove this here for now. And let's remove this here. So one of the powerful things you can do with a procedure is you can define it multiple times. I can define it here, do my then, or I can define it again afterwards here and do it then. When you do a call to a procedure, Osiris is going to run over every definition of that procedure it has and execute them in the order it encounters them. So when we call check if player has all apples, it's going to first check this procedure, then it's going to do this procedure, and then it's going to do this procedure. So what we want to do here is we're going to do a lookup on our database, which is going to return every apple in the game, and add it to this database. And we'll have to remove this here since we don't want the apples to be in there right from the start, since it's a temporary database. So actually we've gotten rid of our, let's get rid of this since we're not going to use it anymore. We've gotten rid of our Jack Apples and World database from the start. So now what's going to happen is if we add an apple, and it's one we're interested in, we're going to check if he has all the apples. We're going to come in here, because this one is the top one, Osiris is going to do this one first. We're going to run over every apple in this database, and we're going to add it, like we've seen before, to the Jack Apples and World database. So when we get to this procedure here, the Jack Apples and World database will have every apple of this database in there. So now what we're going to do is, if this apple is in our inventory, we're going to remove that apple from the Jack Apples and World database. So then we're going to be back into the same thing that we had before, that if a player picked up every apple in the game, this database will be empty. So we can check on that again, like we did before. And then set our event. So to recap, what's going to happen is we're going to add the item to our character. If that item is in this database, the Jack Apples database, we're going to call this procedure. So we're going to jump to here. We're going to loop over every apple in our database. And we're going to put every apple from this database in our new Jack Apples and World database. Then this procedure is going to end. And Osiris is going to jump to the next one, which is going to be this one. It's going to loop again over the Jack Apples database. It's going to check if these apples are in the inventory. And every apple that's in the inventory of this player is going to be removed from this database, the Jack Apples and World database. So when this procedure ends then, we've looped over every apple, we checked them all, we removed the ones that are in the inventory. We're going to come over here and we're going to check if the database is empty. And if it's empty, that means that the player has every single apple in his inventory. So then we can set our character events again with our flag. What's it called again? Lazar's demo has apples. On our player. And we don't care again about the dialog instance. So that's for that. What we need to do now is, instead of changing this to a global event, this is going to be a character event again. There we go. So when we remove an apple and it's an apple from this database, we're just going to clear it. So now let's try this in game. Let's compile and see what happens. Let's go to game mode. There we go. Let's get the quest first. And there's the wolf again. Can't believe I missed. Let's pick up the apples. So now, when I look in my inventory, I have the apples here. I'm gonna talk to him. Actually, we forgot to change the dialogue again. So let's do that first. I don't have it open anymore. I do actually. It's the older one. It's the older one as well. So now we only have one open. I do. Okay. So this is a character flag again. It has apples. This is speaker index 1. This is the player. And we care about the player. Yeah, it's a true again. So now copy this condition. There we go. This is modified. Again, dialogues reload when you talk to a character in the editor. So how good you found them. Thanks so much. And I'm gonna check my apples are gone. So this is all working again. So let's go back to the story editor.